I embarked on a journey from Brooklyn to Vermont, heading to my friend John's cabin for a snowboarding weekend. At the time, I owned two cars, a 2013 BMW 3 Series and a 2006 Ford F-150. On this particular night, I was driving the Ford F-150, which had my snowboarding gear in the truck bed. The time was around 10 p.m., and the roads were pitch black due to the late hour and heavy snowfall. There were no other vehicles in sight as I made my way to my buddy's cabin, approximately 45 minutes away. Unfortunately, my truck had a history of mechanical issues, and this night was no exception. Just when I least expected it, on a desolate and dark road, the engine suddenly started overheating, with the temperature gauge reaching the red zone. I reduced my speed and pulled over to the side, waiting for the engine to cool down. After a while, I cautiously resumed driving, but even at a slow pace, the engine quickly overheated once again, forcing me to pull over and turn off the truck. Underneath the hood, I attempted to diagnose the problem, but the darkness and snow made it nearly impossible. I needed to call John for help, but unfortunately, I had no cell reception on that remote road, leaving me feeling helpless and stranded. I decided to turn the truck back on and wait inside, taking advantage of the warmth it provided while idling. Surprisingly, the engine didn't overheat while I waited. Encouraged, I made another attempt to drive, only to face the same overheating issue. I had no choice but to wait for about 10 minutes until I saw a passing car. With my hazard lights on, I opened the door and waved my arms to catch the attention of the passing vehicle. The driver, in a small Toyota, kindly stopped and rolled down his window. Grateful for his assistance, I explained my predicament and asked to use his phone. Fortunately, he had a signal, indicating he might be a local. I dialed John's number, and he answered. I explained the situation and asked for his advice. John instructed me to contact a specific towing company nearby and assured me that he would come to pick me up. I provided him with my exact location, and he confirmed that he was on his way. Next, I called the recommended towing company and requested their assistance. Throughout these phone conversations, the driver in the Toyota observed my actions attentively. Trying not to dwell on his presence, I returned his phone and expressed my gratitude. He replied with a simple, "You're welcome," and promptly rolled up his window before driving away into the snowy darkness. I watched as his taillights gradually disappeared, descending below the top of the hilly road. Once again, I found myself alone. I returned to my idling truck, seeking solace in the warmth it provided. Curiosity got the better of me, prompting me to briefly turn off the headlights to gauge the intensity of the darkness outside. The lack of visibility was astonishing, with pure blackness stretching as far as the eye could see. I resigned myself to waiting, unable to engage in any activities that required an internet connection. I passed the time playing games on my phone for about 20 minutes until I heard a sudden bang on my passenger side window. Startled, I turned my attention towards the window. It was difficult to make out the figure outside due to the darkness, and the truck's headlights didn't provide much illumination. A man's voice pleaded for help, shouting for me to open the door as he was freezing. He attempted to force the door open, but found it locked. I aimed my flashlight at the window, but it only marginally helped reveal his features. All I could discern was that he wore an oversized black coat with the hood covering his head. In response, I yelled back, asking what was wrong. The mysterious man outside claimed to be lost and stranded, desperate to escape the cold. Something felt off, and I nervously tried to figure out how to verify his intentions and ensure my safety. Before I could come up with a plan, he became more aggressive, relentlessly pounding on the locked door and escalating his cries for help. Trusting my instincts in that heated moment, I put the truck in drive. Realizing my intentions, he intensified his efforts to break the window by pounding even harder. I accelerated onto the road, reaching a speed of 30 miles per hour despite the potential damage I was causing to the already overheating engine. However, what I witnessed next took me by surprise, causing my heart to skip a beat. As I crested a hill on the road, I noticed the reflection of taillights approaching from the side of the road. As I passed the parked car, I recognized it as the same Toyota from earlier, the vehicle driven by the man who had stopped to help me. I reduced my speed, rolled down the window, and peered inside, but there was no sign of the man. It seemed as though the car was empty. Looking beyond the car, I noticed footprints in the snow, illuminated by my taillights, indicating that the person banging on my window was none other than the driver of the Toyota. He had been attempting to deceive me into opening the door, and his true intentions remained unknown. Continuing my journey, fully aware that I was damaging the engine, I pulled over a few minutes later when I saw headlights approaching from the opposite direction. Overjoyed, I realized it was the tow truck I had been eagerly awaiting. I flashed my lights, and the driver pulled over. I explained the recent incident, to which he jokingly remarked that he had arrived at the right time. He inquired if the man had been armed, but I couldn't provide an answer due to the limited visibility. With a sense of urgency, he suggested we complete the towing process quickly. It took the tow truck driver about 15 minutes to attach my truck and prepare it for towing. During that time, the Toyota never passed us, leading me to believe that the driver had turned around and chosen a different route, possibly out of concern for being caught. I used the tow truck driver's phone to contact John once again and informed him that we would meet at the body shop. To summarize the rest, John and I enjoy our snowboarding weekend, and the body shop replaced the faulty water pump in my truck, resolving the overheating issue. A few weeks later, I sold the truck. Looking back, I'm grateful that I trusted my instincts and refrained from lowering my window or unlocking the doors, as it could have led to a dangerous situation. In that isolated setting, I could have fallen victim to a sinister plot, with no one ever discovering the perpetrator's identity. I had my first girlfriend when I turned 17. At that time, I was living with my mom due to my parents' divorce when I was 11. One day, I mustered up the courage to ask my girlfriend out on a date, and she was excited about it. Both of us had jobs. I worked at a local grocery store, while she worked at a Starbucks. Since we both had day shifts, and it was our senior year of high school, I chose a Friday for our date, knowing we wouldn't have much homework afterward. After finishing work, I picked up my girlfriend from her house, and we decided to go to a small restaurant near my place, because it was all I could afford at the time. We enjoyed our meal, and then headed back to her house to spend some quality time together. By the time we arrived, it was already dark outside. My girlfriend expressed disappointment about our short date night, but I explained that I couldn't take her anywhere else that required payment. We eventually agreed to go on a night drive. We drove through town and later found ourselves on an empty road in the woods. Eventually, the pavement ended, and we continued on a dirt road. Suddenly, I felt an urgent need to use the bathroom, and shared this with my girlfriend, who also needed to go. We pulled over and stepped out of the car. Strangely, as soon as we got out, we were hit by a terrible, indescribable odor. I dismissed it as someone else nearby attending to their own needs, but my girlfriend was so disgusted that she gagged. We quickly finished our business and planned to return to the car. On our way back, we heard a noise from the left side that sounded like a twig snapping. Fearing it was an animal, we hurried back to the car. However, just as I was about to open the door, we heard a scream of fear or pain coming from the direction we had just come from. I reassured my girlfriend and asked her to stay in the car while I investigated. Reluctantly, she agreed, and to ensure her safety, I locked the doors. As I walked towards where we had been, I heard the scream again, closer this time. Fear overwhelmed me, and I lost the courage to explore any further. Instead, I took out my phone, turned on the flashlight, and took a quick picture. The flash revealed a man in a white shirt with black stripes, holding a blue tarp in front of him. He was just standing there, motionless. Without hesitation, I sprinted back to the car, unlocked the doors, and floored it. My girlfriend was understandably anxious and kept asking what had happened. She could see the fear on my face, but I reassured her that I would explain later. We returned to the less eerie side of town and drove back to her house. Once inside her room, I shared my encounter with the man and showed her the picture I had taken. We were both thoroughly creeped out by the sight. Given the circumstances and our unease, she kindly allowed me to spend the night. Fortunately, it was a Friday, so we didn't have work or school the next day. That experience was undoubtedly the scariest moment of my life. Although we're no longer in a romantic relationship, we've remained best friends. I'm now 23, and she's 22. It was the late summer of 2011, and I was nearly 19 years old, spending time with my younger best friend in a rural area of southwestern Virginia, about 15 minutes away from Mount Airy, North Carolina. In our small town, most places closed by 10 p.m., leaving us to find our own ways to pass the time. However, that was never an issue for us, as we could always find a way to have fun. The evening began innocently enough, with a trip to the mall and cruising the streets in search of girls, typical activities for teenage guys. When our efforts proved fruitless, we decided to go bowling until closing time. Afterwards, around midnight, we strolled through Main Street, exploring back alleys and pretending to be rebellious. We never felt unsafe since our area had low crime rates. Once we grew tired of walking, we headed to the nearest Waffle House for a late-night meal. Following that, we made a quick stop at Walmart, but we still weren't ready to go home. So we embarked on a drive along some backcountry roads, a familiar pastime for us. These roads offered a chance to create our own fun, especially since they were typically deserted at this hour. The road we were on was one I had only driven on once before during the day. Although it wasn't far from either of our homes, there was no reason to travel down it while still in Carolina. As we crossed into Virginia, the road transitioned from paved to dirt, like many others in the area. This particular road received little maintenance attention due to its remote location and few residences. To navigate it safely, we had to slow down significantly, especially since heavy rains often caused the road to wash out. Despite our caution, it seemed like any other road we drove on, even at this late hour when traffic was scarce. The road primarily passed through wooded areas and nestled at the base of a small mountain. At night, the houses were easily overlooked. We might have missed them entirely if we hadn't noticed a light burning out of the corner of our eyes. Intrigued, we both turned to see a man standing under the porch light. Though we couldn't discern his features, we noticed he was watching us intently, remaining motionless except for his head tracking our movement. While this made us uneasy, we tried not to dwell on it, assuming he was simply stepping outside for a cigarette. It was his overall demeanor that unnerved us. However, this encounter was just the beginning. Gradually, we picked up speed, feeling increasingly uneasy as we discussed the strange man. Within a few minutes, we reached the end of the road and returned to the familiar paved surface, a road I drove on weekly. Taking a right turn, we felt relieved, able to accelerate and leave our thoughts of the man behind. The road offered beautiful views of the town below as it traversed the ridge of a small mountain. After a couple of miles, we reached the end of that road and made another right to head back towards my house. This road was more densely wooded than the previous one, but I was even more familiar with it, having traveled it countless times. As we made our way toward the main highway, we noticed something ahead in the distance illuminated by my headlights. Considering the prevalence of deer in the area, we assumed it was one crossing the road and slowed down. However, as we approached, we realized it wasn't an animal, but a hunched-over figure walking in the left lane, against traffic as one should. We exchanged puzzled glances, wondering why someone would be walking at this hour. Closer inspection revealed an older woman with long, unkempt gray hair wearing a white t-shirt and pants. She remained facing away from us until we were about 50 feet away, at which point she turned to face us. That was when we got a good look at her face. It's hard to say for sure, but she appeared to be in her mid-40s to late 50s, though her worn-out appearance made it difficult to determine her exact age. Her eyes were deeply set with heavy, dark bags underneath them. Her greasy hair and aged skin gave the impression that she might be under the influence of drugs, although it was impossible to be certain. However, the most unsettling aspect was the sight of dried blood splattered on her clothes, with a large knife gripped in one hand. Not knowing her intentions, our desire to be rebellious quickly vanished. We instinctively floored the accelerator and didn't ease up until we reached the highway. We were terrified throughout the entire ordeal, and what should have been a 5-minute drive to my house turned into a 35-minute detour, fueled by the irrational fear that she might somehow follow us. In close-knit communities like ours, everyone knows each other. Yet neither of us had ever seen this woman before, nor did we encounter her again. We monitored local news for any reports of a blood-stained woman being apprehended, but nothing ever surfaced. I still can't fathom an explanation for why she would be walking the backcountry roads at nearly 4 a.m. in her disheveled state, covered in blood, and brandishing a knife. Given the risks of encountering humans or animals, it was an alarming situation. Fast forward to the present day. I now live with my wife on that peaceful road along the mountain ridge, situated between the two roads where these incidents occurred. I often take the latter road as part of my daily routine and haven't seen any trace of that peculiar woman since. Earlier this year, a significant drug and cockfighting ring was exposed down the road from the house where the man had watched us. I can't say for certain if it was the same house or if those individuals lived in the area at the time. However, after everything that happened, I've often wondered if the man was keeping guard on that property. As for the woman, I sincerely hope our paths never cross again.